endpoint that is required for file transaction. So I'll go over that a little bit as well. Just as something I just put together this morning, based on something the document we actually sent out to me, to just add in on this transaction specification document exactly which or what the messaging specification for a particular endpoint will be. So we have just the different 8 or 7 messages listed that we'll be using. If XML is being used or within an RSS envelope or so forth. So it's just really something to give a very quick overview of what the REST API is looking like and what the REST specifications are. Okay, so I'll jump straight into the client registry. Okay, so for client registry, there are really 4 major message types. These are fairly straightforward, so I won't hang on for too long. The first is to just register a new client within the client registry. This is a basic message post with the HL7 message, and you get an acknowledged response if it was created, so nothing really interesting there. The next message is doing a query for clients. So this would be when, for example, like we saw in the OpenRS system on the first day, if the local OpenRS system can't find, for example, a client within its local database, it can do a query of the client registry to try to find a match. And so this endpoint will help facilitate that, and returning a list of clients that match a certain criteria that you provide through query parameters. So this is really where things could change. I've noticed here, seeing as we decided yesterday to with the provider registry to use RSS or Atom to return lists of clients. I think the same should apply to the client registry. So at the moment we're just sending back a concatenation of HL7 messages, which is really not ideal. We had identified the need to come up with some mechanism for encapsulating a list of those HL7 messages, and this could be done using RSS or Atom as well, and it probably makes the most sense in terms of best practice. So I wanted to get a feeling on how everyone else feels about that. Should this also be an RSS and Atom-based response containing HL7 message data within the XML structure? Just like we do for provider registry.
I wonder how specific.
I wonder how specific we want to build these transactions. I got the component pieces here where we query for patient, use patient list to query for patient data, but effectively the use cases are register a patient. Does patient exist? Does this patient exist? Give me data for this patient, right? So if I'm a user on a clinic and I register this patient like that, then I have this notion that I want to get all the shared health record data from them. There could be this notion of a concept that says query for patient data, right, which involves a query of the client registry and a query of the shared health record repository. And so it would be made up of some components like this, right? But I think engineering how that works is not what I'm hearing here. Is we're building up component pieces that sort of have to be plugged together to get that, that engineering workflow. That may work for the pilot, that's maybe where we start, but I'm a little concerned about this round robin approach that may be quite noisy once we get to scale. So maybe I shouldn't be worrying too much about scale here and just worrying about what components should be, but I just want to make sure that we're clear that we're going to be plugging these components together to actually get data out of the system, right?
Yeah, we definitely will be doing that. I think we will have to worry about that when we go to scale, but I don't really see many ways around that. I mean, how else would we have to get that data from the various registries and by some means? So maybe what I'm asking is, what would you suggest as an alternative to doing this, or is there one?
Well, I guess this goes to my context. I want to see what the perceived information flow here. Are these all transactions that, so you get an initial query for client data coming into the interoperability layer from MRS, and then are you suggesting there's a query for clients, and then query for client data all coming from within the interoperability layer, and then that is rolled back out to them? Or do you envision query for clients, back out the interoperability layer, back out with MRS, and then the open MRS person, user system query back to the SH.
So that is actually how we envision it. We would be two separate queries, so that you would at OpenMRS level query for the client's information, the demographic information, and as a separate query we retrieve all their clinical encounters.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on this question, and my thinking has been that somewhere along the line that Sean is saying that given the non-reliability of our internet connections, we really want to minimize the interactivity. So I thought that for the pilot, what we really needed to do was to say, here's somebody that I want to register, can you give me their clinical information? And the answer would either be, yes, here's their clinical information that you're going to use during the encounter, or no, we can't. And that would subsume in that transaction, sort of along the lines of the diagrams that I showed on Monday, okay, is this a legal facility? Is this a legal practitioner? Is this a legal patient? And I think it's a question because do we want to take that approach of just minimize finding out whether the clinical data to support the encounter is there as simply as possible, or do we want to do a more classical search for the person, now that you found the person, look them up in the patient register? So I've basically seen there being two transactions really at the beginning of the encounter, give me the data, at the end of the encounter, here is the data. And that's sort of feeding the registries. In that way of thinking, all of the registry-specific transactions, get client, get provider, get facility, are really all futures as far as the maternal child health scenario goes. And I know, last year, I was thinking more along the lines of the common transactions, had discussions with Liz about the internet issue, tried to simplify it to the max. And that's what the diagrams have been of late.
So to frame this, I think there's very viable technical approaches here. Each technical approach has user workflow implications, and they also have some performance implications. There's not a very long answer here. And it sounds like there has been some dialogue on this particular issue. And I guess my question to you, Ryan, is the model you're proposing here based on those previous conversations of how we think the workflow should go? has been a full synthesis of this to arrive at that. Because if that's the case, then Sophia must have gone.
Let me throw one more thing in, which is, very recently, we felt that we wanted to specify all the transactions to support the registries as things in themselves, independently of the upcoming implementation. Because to show the skeleton of the system and show that we have the pieces as we get the components in place, that we can put them, that we have a place to put them. So when I look at these, that's the way I've been reading them.
Just coming back to your question, there, Sean, this document has very heavily influenced the design of how OpenRIM's workflow would occur. Wayne's been working very closely with that, and everyone wants to comment on that further.
In terms of the option, Sean, I think also we did discuss this last week, and my understanding that was that we agreed on it. We imposed the expected workflows and messaging from OpenRIS. Remember that they were having and then we that fed into the document that I produced.
So these atomic transactions need to be there. They all need to be there regardless. The question is how they're glued together. So to Need's point, when a patient is registered, that often can be a trigger to not only register, but pull the data at the same time, right? And so the only reason you wouldn't enable that automatic transaction is when you can't get a unique hit, or this is a new patient, there's no data return, right? And so what I was asking when I saw these atomic transactions was I was trying to think of the information flow. And so what I heard was register a patient. I didn't hear that there was going to be data come back. I heard query for a patient, get hits back, end user, query again for the data, comes back, and that can be a bit of a cumbersome flow. And so if we can enable workflows where register a patient implies return data, are we doing that? Is that a workflow that we explicitly enable here or not?
No, it's separate. So you make query design to get the results, either 0, 9, function those.
So it is a two-stage.
And then separate to that, you create for more information on them, etc. And then you eventually put the new consideration to
And I think the reason there was 2 was because of that query, you may not get the person, or you may get multiple, and there was a need to do some validation, especially at the beginning when there's a good chance things are taking up.
Yeah, the thing is that workflow is assuming that the OpenRIS workflows are only going to support. These are atomic transactions that have a set, defined scope, and we should allow OpenRIS to call which ones its needs. And other systems will maybe only have to register a patient, not have to get all the data back. So I think they fairly. They have very specific use cases for each of these transactions, and I'm not sure if we should allow the workflow to depict what is returned in some of these messages, but rather allow them the workflow to be enabled through these atomic transactions. I don't know if that makes sense.
Sure. There is a notion of registration with data return as well. So in the system that Paul and I are most familiar with, actually have both types. There are there's authoritative and non-authoritative registration systems. Non-authoritative registration systems can tell you about patients, but they can't declare identity within the system. Authoritative registration systems can tell you about a patient, provide clinical data, and declare what the identity is. And then there are authoritative registration systems that can tell you about a patient, and also when I send you information about them, I want information back as well. So there's sort of conflation of multiple transactions there that actually improve the efficiency, because the user on the other side don't want to be saying, okay, do you have, it's sort of like a 20 questions game, you know, is it less than 3? That's okay. Is it this one? Okay. You know, it's just minimizing that interaction that I think we might want to be mindful of. This is the last thing I'm going to say about that. I completely agree that these transactions will make this work and provide users what they want. I just want us to be mindful, forward-thinking about how this could be streamlined or potentially modified in the future to improve that workflow.
Okay, so maybe we should just note for the future that these transactions could be perhaps, this API could perhaps be extended to have calls that can actually orchestrate a bunch of these almost low-level transactions into a single transaction for efficiency. I think, is that characterizing what you...
So orchestrating them together, maybe they remain in common, but they just coordinate.
And that would happen in the interoperability, correct? Yeah, people would say, oh, I got a perfect match on the interactive as opposed to the two calls. And I think that from the clinical workflow perspective, the main priority was to query the shared health record which you had patient, not necessarily that a clinician wanted to do it so that we had that time to get back. So, I mean, both would work. I think that whereas what you're proposing is just more complex for our first iteration than what might be valid for our second.
But it might get us different business. If you're starting to approach a steady state and you don't work for being optimistic, because it's usually going to work, and if you're bootstrapping from the state and you want to be a little bit more pessimistic and have the more involved workflow, because that's probably the way it's usually going to be. But you can start to put the optimism into the interoperability layer so that the queries may come back to one and only one result. And if you're accompanying that is the clinical information, usually one and only one result.
Yeah, truthfully, I was a little bit concerned about the data that we're going to get originally, just because, from other downloads of large amounts of data, there's some issues. And so, at least at the beginning, if a person checked to say, if you mistype their NID or something, you get somebody else, and you might have seen data you shouldn't, or that. So at least when you get the patient returns, a person can look and say, yeah, that's where I am. But I agree with you that that's a definite opportunity.
Bandwidth constraints might really drive you more quickly towards what you described.
And if the first 3 sites go up, and then we realize this is a problem,
The other thing you want to look for is if the purpose of this is to top up the information that's already at the local MRS with whatever may be new. You also might want to be looking to say timestamp since, otherwise you can get subsequent queries is going to be a larger data set, in which case that's also not good on in a late-end situation.
That is very cool. We do have those sort of queries for editors as well. So, that's cool. Okay, so I think we're landing on it's okay about this for now, but we should be wary in the future and perhaps provide some orchestration of these to improve efficiency. Is that okay?
Yeah, and I think the only other comment I would make is given your namespacing and your name conventions with what Sean is saying, if you're wanting to kind of coordinate a bunch of these calls together, you should be thoughtful about what you would name it. Make sure that your naming convention will allow for that. Yeah. So is the naming convention too generic where it would be difficult to create a different call that would be more coordinated? So we look at all of them, so query clients. So which ones do you need right now to register application? So it's query for clients and get clients. So it's patients come query or question mark query. Correct.
So query for patient encounters simply to return a list of encounters and then get encounters and get a sufficient list.
Well, I think we mentioned that from last time, is the query patient counts would be a list of those who still be full. It's counts we wouldn't link to.
Yes.
Which is
There's a singular.
Is there a singular for encounter? So you want to get, and what's the return value for get all encounters, hopefully it's a CCD?
But it's going to be an H7 OUR1 with most multiple.
We should talk about that.
Okay. We can talk about that. When we get to the JL group, we can discuss that.
Generally speaking, I would key messages or actions, but when it comes to getting patient records, I don't know, Derek, whether you agree with that or not. Yeah. An RO1 dump is done, but it's not as standard as like a CCD. They're not doesn't cost you a whole lot more.
I was just going to say, though, if you are getting updated suits, you might want to return that instead, as it would be easier to consume it on the MRS side. Instead, it was a collection of messages going in. Because I have to disassemble the CCD, and that actually might be a bit more. So just in terms of the machine processing, you might be better served by the collection.
The R1 now. Can we parameterize that for get that kind of work?
We could, yeah, that's definitely possible. We could do most things, but that adds the elements we want to generate.
We could definitely support it for CBA.
I think that's
My main
discussion
concern
to
with that
machine on
was
record.
the end user.
Say that for sure.
Yeah, I think we should both finish the plan and we can talk about it in context. Okay. So basically, we also have a standard data client message, which returns HL7. That's not really. I think where we stopped last time, actually, when we started the discussion, was the use of RSS or Atom as the listing response for a query for multiple clients. Assuming you've got a register, we've got a super of this, is that a good direction to take? I feel that this is a good standards-based approach rather than concatenating HL7 messages together. Do you feel that that's easy enough to support? Embedding in RSS? Okay. So, then I think that's agree that RSS is something that we should use throughout the API as some sort of listing mechanism when we need to return lists of responses.
However, the responses are going to have discrete data in it, and we're going to need to adapt the convention for those data element names. I mean, if we're using HL7 as a paradigm, we may want to, actually I would recommend following the HL7 XML conventions and using that naming scheme for the bits of information.
Yeah, so there's really two ways we can do this. One is, like you said, within the RSS feed we will have the HL7 XML based schema. The other way to do this is actually to wrap the EDR version of HL7 in a CA element tag. So basically just putting it as a text string within XML. So I think there's two ways to do this. Probably the way I thought about it before is probably using a CA tag makes the size a lot smaller, because that HL7 EDR is quite a compact format. And we all know, well, XML is not very compact because it's designed to be simply readable. So there's two ways we can go about it. Either we can put the HL7 XML or the from like I said, I don't know if you've got opinions about that.
I'm not sure what you mean when you say easy enough.
I think that's what you call compliments.
Oh, okay.
I would recommend next time. Yeah, actually, this building's a no. And it gives us some opportunity.
Be aware that HL7's flavor of XML code is not particularly human readable, unless you've memorized the numbers of the components.
One of the truths about anything we're sending as a CDA is that it lends itself to being rendered. You can consume it, but it also lends itself to being rendered. And one of the things we talked about at dinner yesterday is that there could be folks that we want to bring to phase 2 of the hospital or something.
Yeah, we're really falling into a next year discussion.
The next year.
And we haven't finished this year.
But if we get the one that can also. We need to go back to the next.
Yeah, so I think not just what I mentioned, but also easy for other people to see it's most beneficial. Any sort of benefit you got from compression, right? Overrated right compression, it should be anyways. So it's really making it harder for people to know in the future. If you were like a choice or anything, that 6 or half dozen, I would definitely put that next time.
Two pushbacks on that.